Well, it's March the 17th, St. Patrick's Day, and today we have kind of a mixture of things to discuss. Of course, our old friend the filibuster has popped up again as a major topic, I guess, with the comments both from the Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell and now from President Biden, and which kind of followed that interview with with Joe Manchin a while back. But essentially the issue has come up as to will the Democrats end the filibuster in order to pass their H.R. 1 bill in order to kind of rig the whole political system in favor of Democrats, or will they not? That's an interesting dilemma here, and we'll see how that goes. Now, if you like these videos, remember to subscribe and give me a like, and I appreciate comments. I don't get many comments, but it'd be good to have some feedback. That's the situation at the moment. Now, one thing to consider is that what they're talking about now apparently, for some reason, is going back to what they call the talking filibuster, meaning in the olden days, I don't know exactly how that rule changed. It's hard to look. Probably need to find a book on the history of it and how everything evolved. But at one time, essentially, people actually had to actually keep talking until either somebody was able to get a cloture vote or they basically ran out of time. And so this is the objective, the idea of making it more difficult. But in reality, it will make it more difficult for everybody. Because if I understand it, they have to be careful about keeping the right kind of quorums in place and everything else to do the talking filibuster approach. The other thing is given the fact it's a 50-50 Senate, and given the type of bills that the Democrats are wanting to end the filibuster over, I don't think there'll be any shortage of people willing to talk at length about these subjects. So in other words, I really tend to think that tactic itself won't get the result they want, and in fact it'll burn up almost all the time to do other things they need to get done, such as getting people confirmed to various appointed positions in the sub-cabinet and otherwise. So it seems like that's a theoretical idea, but it doesn't really work. What really would work, I would think, they'll either have to leave it more or less like it is, or else they'll have to pretty much completely abolish it. I don't see that the intermediate step really gains them anything at this point. But that's been kind of pitched out by the Democrats at the moment. I think this is more like expressions of frustration at this point. The other question is, I'm still unclear what the probability of this all happening is, because while everybody likes to focus on two senators that kind of went out and took a public stance, that is Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema, the fact of the matter is there were 8 senators that voted against the blowing up the bird rule in order to pass a $15 minimum wage. And the $15 minimum wage, I think, has a lot more popularity than H.R. 1 does. I mean, I'm not necessarily for the $15 minimum wage because minimum wage. I think the problem with it is it's applying a single standard across the entire country with vastly different standards of living. And so if the objective is to give everybody, quote, a living wage, well, what's a living wage in a small town in some, Midwestern small town, or even in the deep South, and what's a living wage in New York or San Francisco is just so totally different levels of money that I just think that approach doesn't work. The other thing is that the purpose of the minimum wage job, generally speaking, is not for primary breadwinners of a family. It's generally more for young people, like working their way through school or part-time jobs to pay for their car or gasoline or things of that sort, or entry-level people just trying to get their foot in the door. And so the idea over there would be that if people stay with the job more than a few months, they will be promoted to much higher wages anyhow. So that's one of the issues that you kind of get. But let's don't get off in a minimum wage discussion too deep. The key thing is that I'm trying to make is the minimum wage, that would be a relatively minor tweak to the Senate rules to do that, compared to totally eliminating the filibuster to pass massive legislation to transform the electoral system, add states, monkey with the Supreme Court, etc. that is a much bigger thing, and I think would have a lot more political blowback. So if there's 8 people that didn't want to do it over the minimum wage, I'm kind of dubious that they're going to do it over H.R. 1, but we'll see. I mean, if they do, they're really declaring war on the rest of the country, in my opinion. So, at any rate, that's a pending issue and a real threat. We'll get an early taste, I guess, when these. I think I've heard that some of the gun control legislations, H.R. 8 and some other bill, I forget what that is, will come up for vote perhaps next week. I've heard that next week might be when they do it, and that'll be a kind of a first test to see what happens, I guess. So anyway, I just kind of update people on that. The other thing that's kind of an update, because this is going to be kind of a series of these little updates, I guess, and that is that we have, I did a video, it's the one before last, where I discussed a kind of a radical speculative hunch, or maybe theory. I suppose critics would call it a conspiracy theory, but whatever, about the whole nature of the COVID-19 virus and its origins. And I suggested that it could be a result of a genetic engineering bioweapon project. And it's interesting that David Asher, who was head of the State Department task force on the COVID-19 origins during the previous administration, just gave an interview on Fox, I guess last night, in which he basically was kind of going along my lines of suggesting that this virus was the result of a genetic engineering project, a bioweapon project. Now, he didn't go as far as one of the theories I put in, and probably my most controversial idea was that it was actually also targeting, designed in a way not to target certain genetic markers which would represent the genetics of the Chinese people, and by default, similarity with other East Asians might also benefit from this, even though I don't think they were trying to protect them as such. But, you know, if you're doing it that way, it's going to have effects that are beyond your, you know, initial plan probably. And that's, of course, very controversial, I guess. Is that even possible? And I'll openly admit, I don't know if it's even possible. But, I mean, you know, we're dealing with a country which has successfully cloned a human being, although the scientists got in trouble for it afterwards. And it is clear cut that the research seemed to be oriented toward making the disease more contagious. And that's kind of an indicator of a bioweapon project. So my little wild idea may not be as far off as you might originally thought it was, and even more so than even I necessarily thought it was. But I just thought that was an interesting little update on that development. We'll just have to wait and see if anything comes of it. I know that there's a big bias against anything other than this being naturally occurring, because if it was, of course, that would create a lot more international tensions, obviously. But to add to it, I understand that an Air Force war game that was played recently about the ability of us to fight China had us being the loser, but one of the key things was it started off with a Chinese biological war attack. So it does seem like the people that presumably have a lot more expertise in these areas than I do are thinking along these lines. Let's just put it that way. So I just say, you know, don't go off and believe a lot of things here. Just put it on the possibles list and kind of check back in times with the data you see to see whether it's heading that way or heading in a different direction. Another interesting development I'd like to address briefly is I think a poll came out recently which showed that I think 49% of Republican men were going to avoid getting the COVID-19 vaccinations. And I find this very paradoxical, whereas I think that only a small percent of Democrat men were going to do it. Now, there's a few things that seem suspicious about that poll. First of all, as I understood, a lot of the resistance really is in the minority communities, which tend to predominantly be more Democratic. So that seems to kind of go a little bit against the numbers they were throwing out. So, and the other thing that seems weird to me about it is after all these vaccines were a Trump project, and these people, Republican men, are presumably key Trump supporters, so why would they reject the products of one of Trump's most notable successes? A very interesting question. But anyway, I just thought I'd mention that that's out there. It seems kind of strange to me, but we'll see. I know there are kind of, I guess there's two schools of thought out there, basically. One is just the normal anti-vax people in general, and the second is the idea that since this is under emergency use authorization, people are just a bit more afraid of it than they might be your typical yearly flu shot or any of the other standard vaccines that children tend to get and so forth. So anyway, just thought I'd bring that up for a little thought and comment as to why that might be the case. And the other thing that's brewing here in this next bill that the Democrats are pushing, which seems to be kind of a mixture of infrastructure and tax increases, and which may relate a little bit to the first topic I brought up here. It looks like that there's a big push on the part of the Biden administration to do some significant tax increases. And they're going to be sold because, for the most part, it looks like they're going to target mostly the rich initially, or wealthier, and businesses, as if that won't hurt the ordinary Joe. I mean, it won't necessarily hurt the ordinary person if you're looking at it from the point of view of let's just say this, what is going to come out of your own paycheck. It won't be that kind of damage, but it may have a damage to a lot of people on whether or not they get a paycheck. I mean, after all, Joe Biden has been killing jobs from day one, and I guess a lot of his stimulus spending will help a lot of his constituencies, but most of those constituencies already have jobs, and, teachers and so forth, and city administrators and so forth. So it's hard to know what this will do. Obviously, the infrastructure bill should eventually create work, but we remember that from the Biden years, from the Obama years, when Biden was vice president, a lot of those shovel-ready jobs weren't as shovel-ready as people thought, so we don't know what he's going to do about various regulations and stuff that might slow things down. If he leaves the changes that Trump did in place, then he probably can get these projects going a lot sooner than otherwise. But it looks like the focus is going to be on business corporate taxes, capital gains taxes, supposedly focusing on the more upper income people. And let's see. And I've heard that there was some discussion, I don't know if this is going to happen or not, of increasing the limit on the FICA taxes, which are capped at a certain income level. And of course, the Medicare tax goes up all the way to however much earned income a person has, but the FICA tax is capped. And so the question is, will they raise that cap up, several, maybe all the way up or part way up to the income scale. Of course, that would be against the no tax increases on people under $400,000 a year that Biden threw out during the campaign. We don't know if that's going to be in the package or not, and it's looking like that if they want the tax increases in, it'll be another case of reconciliation. So anyhow, that's kind of about it for today. I just thought I'd kind of cover a series of things that are kind of contemporary and some of which relate to other topics in the past, kind of like an update. And so that'll be it for today. And again, forward these to anybody that might be interested. Thanks.